it. And just for the benefit of any doubt, you don't need to stand up. This is a cabinet meeting, not a full council, even though we are in the chamber. So please stay seated. And if you've got mobiles, and most of us have these days, can you make sure they're on mute or on vibrate or something so we don't get music in our ears during the meeting, please? Right, apologies. Kate.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillors Peter Wolfe, Gary Settle and David Walsh.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Anybody got an interest? I can't see anybody. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of April. Can I sign those as a true record? I don't see anybody disagreeing with that, so I'll deal with that after the meeting. Public participation. There are no public questions or statements today. And we've got questions by members, and we've got two today, one from Paul Kimber and one from Brian Heatley, both of which I will respond to. So over to you, Paul.
Yeah, I'll get it right this time. Thank you, Leader. I think my first question has been answered, but I will read it out because there was a lot of concern amongst our senior citizens. I've had a complaint from a senior resident of Dorset regarding our accompanying council letter for householders on the new council tax, and we had another letter telling us we would get a council tax rebate in April of £150 towards the cost of living crisis. We're asking to contact the Dorset Council to find when this will be paid into our bank accounts in April. The question is, when will this be paid? I look forward to your advice.
Turn your microphone off, Paul, please. Right, thank you very much for your question, Paul, and very relevant in today's circumstances. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that the first payments to Dorset Council residents were made on the 11th and 12th of May. We've made over 78,000 individual payments amounting to more than 11.7 million to council taxpayers and Band A to D who pay their council tax by direct debit. This week, we'll be writing to the 44,000 other residents who are entitled to the payment but who do not currently pay by direct debit. The letter will explain the residents how to apply, and the scheme will be closed on the 30th of September 22. Okay? Right, Brian, your moment.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Brian Heatley from Rodwell and Wyke. This is to nudge you to put something on your to-do list. It's nearly a year ago now since we passed a resolution in full council to review our system of governance. What I would like, this is going to be a complex business, it's going to take a while. I'd like to know when you're going to be in a position to set out proposals for a term of reference, count of how and by whom the review will be carried out, and a timetable.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Brian. On the 1st of September 2021, I shared with the group leaders a proposed timeline for the work of a Governance Executive Advisory Panel. That timeline was to enable work to be completed on the ongoing community governance review before we began the work on the Governance Executive Advisory Panel, and still enable us to have a good decision to be made by full council before the end of May 24. The main points of the timeline are these. April 22, officers are doing some research to identify other councils of similar size, operating a committee system, investigating different committee arrangements and governance options. September 22, the Governance EAP, the first meeting of the EAP to arrange terms of reference, frequency of meetings and other relevant governance arrangements to the panel. September 23, full council to make a in-principle decision on whether to implement a committee system informed by a detailed report from the EAP. The timeline provided a full year between 22 and September 22 and September 23 to complete the review and for the panel to arrive at a recommendation. In July 22, I intend to share proposed terms of reference with group leaders and invite nominations to serve on the panel. Do you want to come back?
Thank you very much. Slightly faster than the timetable I've written down here. Thank you.
Always ahead of the game, Brian, you know that. Right, let's move on to the forward plan, the Cabinet forward plan, colleagues. It's for noting. I think what you will note in some aspects is a little bit sparse at the moment, and I've had a conversation with the Chief Executive about populating a little more than it currently is, and hopefully by the time we get back to the next Cabinet meeting, we'll see a change in that respect. So happy to note? Thank you very much. Members noted. So we now go on to agenda item 7, revised inter-authority agreement for a joint archive service, and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Laura Miller.
Thank you, Leader. So really pleased to bring this report to you today, which is the revised inter-authority agreement for the Joint Archive Service for your endorsement. So since taking up this portfolio for culture, customer and communities, it includes responsibility for the Joint Archive Service. I've been absolutely delighted to be working with this successful Pan-Dorset partnership, which is Dorset and BCP councils. It was established in 1997. It's nationally accredited, and it is a superb example of successful partnership working, with our Dorset History Centre seen as a great asset dedicated to preserving, sharing and celebrating the rich heritage of Dorset. And I would also like to commend Sam Johnson for this agreement and this report, and also all the work he does, because he's also nationally recognised as being one of the best. So thank you to Sam. So I've recently taken the chair of the existing board, and we considered this item, that's the Joint Archives Advisory Board. The existing inter-authority agreement is dated from 1997. It does need to be updated to reflect both councils' new operating models, enabling us to underwrite proper political, financial and strategic oversight of the Joint Archives Service, and also to provide relevant governance structure to oversee both the strategic direction and the standard of service delivered to residents. The report also provides a revised structure for the Joint Archive Board, which will ensure proper governance and accountability are retained by the partner local authorities. The Joint Archives Advisory Board did endorse the revised agreement and governance model, and they did make some changes which are included. So it's recommended to strengthen the strategic focus and to give us a framework for us to work alongside officers in the community to provide an ambitious development plan, which is really exciting stuff for the future. So I'd like to propose the recommendation, and that's that Cabinet approves the adoption of the revised inter-authority agreement with BCP Council over the provision of the Joint Archives Service. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Laura. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Tony Ferrari. Before I open up to the Cabinet, any non-executive members wish to comment on this report? Tony Alford.
Thank you. I just have one question, referring to pages 44 and 45. Paragraph 3.3 gives a clear intention, I think, that the minimum period of this agreement will be for 5 years. So I understand that. Then I look at subparagraph 5.4, which is about the commitment of Dorset Council to provide the service. And I wonder if it's possible to tell me, within the first 5 years, what the investment will need to be in order to comply with this commitment for sufficient storage and appropriate standards.
Thank you, Tony. It is, but that's a level of detail that I'm probably going to look to Sam for. So, Sam, are you comfortable to come in with that? Because obviously it will develop, and we will need to address that. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the question. At this stage, we're in the early days process of establishing how much would be required in order to undertake a project to extend the History Centre. As you probably know, it's been a long-standing ambition to do so. We've been looking at this for over 10 years. Currently, we've been in discussions with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and the hope is, having discussed this with colleagues here, that we will be able to go forward with an application to lottery, which would require match funding from Dorset Council to support it. But if the council's prepared to do that, then there's substantial external funding, up to about 60% of the total cost, which could be brought to bear on that project. Currently, the figures are being assessed by property colleagues, so I couldn't give you precise numbers on that, but can come back with those later. That's helpful.
Thank you very much, Sam. Very helpful. Right, I don't see anybody else. Cabinet colleagues, you've heard the report, the answer to the question. Anybody in comments, or Jill?
Thank you, Leader. This used to be in my portfolio. I'm really pleased it's got to this stage. It has been a somewhat tortuous route to move forward, and Sam has just done some amazing work in order to bring this to this stage. So 3 cheers for Sam, and let's hope it moves on sensibly from here.
Thank you for that, Jill. I think we're well said. Andrew Parry.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, because I know prior to the pandemic that the Archive Service had a number of volunteers working alongside them, playing an important role in the work that they were doing. And I'm just wondering if Sam can give us an update and any sort of indication of whether they'd be able to maintain those links with those keen amateur archivists, if I can refer to them in those terms, because they did provide sterling service, I know.
Yes, indeed. Volunteers, in fact, are back in today at the History Centre. What we're also doing is a lot more remote volunteering, using digital technology to allow people to engage with the heritage, but obviously not have to come into Dorchester to do so. So yes, our numbers are growing, and part of that future project I mentioned is indeed to increase that number again.
Thank you very much. I don't see anybody else indicating to speak. So does any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendations set out in the report? Pause. In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved as set out in the report. So we now move on to agenda item 8, minimum income guarantee in charges for adult social care and support. And in the absence of Peter Wharf, who's on holiday, well deserved, I'm going to hand over to one of the lead members, Jane Somper, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this paper outlines in detail the adoption of a current national regime of charges to residents called the Minimum Income Guarantee, or MIG, as it's referred to in the papers. In summary, the MIG is the weekly amount of income that residents who are in receipt of care and support arranged by Dorset Council in their own home need to retain at a certain level to cover their living costs. Dorset Council and the former top-tier authority Dorset County Council had previously adopted the national set MIG rates through local arrangements. This paper is a means to bring this issue in front of Cabinet today for formal adoption, to set out the mechanism for all future decisions on the setting of the MIG rate, including the ability of overview and scrutiny committees to be able to comment on the position. This allows this council a systematic way to continually review the MIG rates. Any charges made by local authorities must not reduce residents' income below a certain amount. This amount and the detail of the levels are discussed in the paper, and the rationale for charging and setting the personal expenses allowance. Cabinet should be aware that these rates are set nationally and have a level of robustness from the national information and analysis that the Department of Health and Social Care collates in its annual setting of this rate. Any exceptions to these national rates would be a diversion from nearly every other council, which would pose a different set of risks for this authority. And any measures to support our residents with the cost of living should be done as a wider set of measures. There are a suite of recommendations here that Cabinet are being asked to agree to following a thorough review by officers which began in October last year. based on the available evidence, along with a strong role for the complaints and informal appeals process. This will assist in ongoing understanding of the impact of these rates for our residents and whether they are set at the right levels, particularly when considering any further increases to the MIG as part of budget setting. Thank you, Leader, and I have Steve Beavers here who will be able to ably assist in answering any questions. Thank you.
Steve, you got anything to add to what Jane said? Okay. Right, as usual, before I open up the debate to Cabinet, and I can see Brian Heatley's got his hand up. Brian.
Thank you, Leader. I am concerned about how far the wider context of our response to the current inflation crisis has been considered in dealing with this. We've set a budget where we, I think, had a 2% assumption for inflation. I know that we made certain special provisions as well to take account of the inflation we then expected. We're now in a world where people are expecting 8 or 10%. So we have a wider process to do to work out how we're going to respond to that. And I find it slightly odd that we're dealing with just one item in isolation. The factors in that wider process are going to partly consist of the budget overall, partly consist of our power to do things. In this case, we've got to increase by 3%, but we could increase by more. There are other areas where we have more discretion, other areas where we have less. And then surely the third factor is how vulnerable are the people who are going to be affected by each individual decision. Now, it may be that the overall conclusion from all this is the rather horrible one that we really have very, very little hope of doing anything for the most vulnerable. But if that's the case, I think that needs to be done understood in a wider context. In this case, we're dealing with a very, very vulnerable group, those who are receiving care at home. This minimum income guarantee largely refers to food and energy, which are the things most subject to the inflation crisis. So I think I would like to be assured that we really, really do have to do this because of the wider context. Thank you.
Steve, can I get you to respond to that, please?
Leader. So thank you, Councillor. There's some very important points and some very poignant points within your questions. I'm going to take them in two parts, if that's okay to do. So the first one particularly around the timelining of the decision and the implementation of this. And you rightly alighted on the fact that even as a council, alongside central government, have a timeline. So the setting of this 3% increase rate that is recommended nationally was done at a time when inflation was running at about that point in time. So this is not a decision around the correctness of the 3%. It's about the implementation of the nationally set and appropriate level that central government has decided on at the appropriate time to do so. So I would hold that as one of the recommendations being that the Cabinet and Council may wish to take a wider degree of scrutiny about the wider suite of measures on the cost of care as part of it rather than an individual item in and of itself. For the second point around the overall position for some of our most vulnerable residents, and that is a area that is very close to my heart, as you would expect, the position that I'm in. My teams, my social workers, have a level of oversight and ability to intervene, both from an informal and exceptions point of view, for any particular hardships. And part of the strengths-based practice that we routinely do as social workers and social work practices will make sure that people's needs are taken in the round rather than just as an individual care requirements. Referrals onto appropriate support services and maximisation of benefits, support around budgeting and accessing food banks or other VCSE support are all routinely part of the activity that social workers will do day in, day out, and our work that we do with our wider VCSE colleagues as part of that. So although I accept the position around the overall impact and the awareness that Cabinet will wish to take into account, there is a range of mitigation that is taken on as well as our position in doing so.
Thank you very much. Simon Christopher.
Thank you. I listened to the comments of Councillor Brian Heatley with interest. I was a few minutes late because I was listening to the Bank of England chief, Andrew Bailey, talking to the members from Worcester West and Moulton. And there's a recognition, of course, that inflation is a worldwide problem. And it is disappointing to see that the minimum income guarantee figures are perhaps little removed from the time when we migrated from the charging for residential accommodation guide through to the Care Act. The position is perhaps lamentable, but I feel reassured that our leader, when he goes to the LGA conference next month, will be making this point to other council leaders and indeed to members of Parliament. So I rest assured on that basis, but we recognise that inflation is a problem outside of the government's control, with too much money chasing too few goods. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I don't see any other non-executive members. Oh, Shane Bartlett.
Thank you. I just wanted to, on page 71 2.6, where it talks about how we're going to monitor the complaints. It's just a quick one, really. Are we intending to actually monitor these complaints through the new performance dashboard that we've got?
So, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. A good question. We are committed to the complaints being picked up as wider within our current corporate complaints process, and we will be able to report on those as a separate entity. So, with the formal adoption, which is part of the recommendations, we will, of course, want to see if there is an increase in year and a continual basis. So we will have a filtration ability to do within our complaints process, is our understanding. So, yes.
Right, Cabinet colleagues, comments? Well, I don't see any. Well, does any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendations set out in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Thank you very much. Go on to agenda item 9 now, the re-procurement of learning and development framework. Andrew Parry.
Thank you. Yes, bringing to Cabinet today the re-procurement of learning development framework for children and adults and housing services. The purpose of the report is to request a decision from Cabinet to approve a tender of framework contracts for learning and development activities for children's services and the Pan Dorset Safeguarding Children Partnership and adult and housing services. The current framework does expire in March 2023. The new framework will be open periodically to allow more providers to join, leading to healthy competition in the market, best value, and a wider choice of quality provision. The framework will operate for 4 years, ending in March 2027. Chairman, I've got 2 recommendations that the Cabinet is asked to consider the content of the report in respect to the proposed framework and agrees. To commence the procurement process, award contracts and implement the framework as per table summarised in 1.4. The further step of making the framework award should be delegated to myself as portfolio holder for children after consultation with the Executive Director. And the reasons for the recommendation that Cabinet is required to approve all key decisions with financial consequences in excess of £500,000, that the current contractual arrangements will come to an end in March 2023, and to be compliant with procurement legislation to ensure best value and quality of training provision.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Non-executive colleagues, anyone want to comment? Don't see anybody. Okay. Right. Cabinet? No? Andrew, you obviously proposed this recommendation. Laura, thank you very much. So does any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendation set in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Move on to agenda item 10 now, Aspire adoption statement, Andrew.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, our annual statement to Cabinet and will forward on to Council for the Aspire Adoption Service, our Pan-Dorset regional adoption agency, which we run with BCP. The service is managed by Michelle Whiting, and my thanks go to Michelle and her team for the excellent work they've done in the most trying of circumstances throughout the pandemic. However, Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask that the Executive Director just briefs Cabinet on the Somerset Judgment, which will have a bearing on our work.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. So really a very good news story in this adoption summary, as you'll have seen. Some really good progress made throughout the time of the pandemic, which isn't actually generalised across the country. I think it's all credit to both Aspire and colleagues within Dorset Council who have worked incredibly hard to keep matching children, keep placing children for adoption throughout all of this time. And it is because of that that we do see ourselves in that place where you can see in page 94 with Jake's story, even managing to place some really challenging young people during this period. However, what also occurred during this period was a case law finding, which is called the Somerset Judgment, which was around the way in which a number of local authorities across the region were receiving health reports to be able to place children, or to make the decision to place children. And some of those health reports that were received by the ADMs, that would have been the Corporate Director for Safeguarding, were abridged, awaiting further information. Some of that was as a result of the pandemic, and some of that was as a result of, I think, a kind of a way of trying to progress health reports more speedily across the whole of the South West. However, there was a challenge to some of that because whilst the full medical reports were always available at the point at which the child was finally adopted, they hadn't been fully available at the time at which the decision for adoption had been made. And so the Somerset Judgment said that needed to be paused around those children for whom a decision had been made and who were not yet placed, and for a review of all of those cases to be undertaken across the region. That review has been undertaken. That has meant that 10 children for us in Dorset who were within adoptive placements or matched to adoptive placements have had a delay in that final adoption hearing. What I am really pleased about is that the close work with those adoptive carers has meant that no placement has disrupted. So actually those adoptive carers have been talked through the process of this important judgment and absolutely continued with their programme. But clearly we all know that the importance of attachment in adoption is so important. It's been really close working that's made that happen. But so you will see in months to come a bit of a gap in the actual placement orders made, and that's due to the Somerset Judgment. But actually if no children and no placements were lost in this process, just somewhat elongated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa and Andrew. Right, before out with Cabinet, any non-executive colleagues wish to comment? If not, I'll come back to Cabinet. Comments, questions? Anyone? Ray.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd just like to take the opportunity to congratulate the team on the work they've done on this. It's become more and more apparent that the better guidance we give the younger generation, the more responsible adult they turn out to be. And this shows the importance of this work. So as I say, I'd like to place on record my thanks to the team that have produced a fantastic report, and I look forward to monitoring this going forward, and obviously from my seat offering any assistance that I can give to make sure that this becomes an even bigger success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. I'm sure your remarks will be well received. Laura, and then Jill.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just a quick comment. Particularly wanted to comment in the report about the case studies, because I think when you, excuse me, when you have a really comprehensive report that's full of, facts, figures, and all of these things, but actually when you see a case study and you think that's a child that has a family now, and I think that's really, really powerful. So I just wanted to comment that particularly jumps out, and thank you for all the work that you've done.
Jill.
Previous two have stolen my thunder. I'm just going to agree.
Well, I don't see anybody else. You could have kept your microphone on. I presume you're going to second this, Jill, aren't you?
I'm absolutely delighted to second it because it's such a good news story and it's just really excellent work by the team. So very pleased to do that.
By definition, Andrew, you proposed it. So does any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendations set in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Now we go on to a recommendation from committee, and there's one, which is the Youth Justice Plan. Back to Andrew.
Thank you. While I just busily scroll through the screen here to get to the appropriate point. But I'm very grateful to the Overview Committee under chairmanship of Mike Parks for the considered debate and feedback they gave us on the report. The Youth Justice Service, of course, is another joint service that we have with BCP. It's very important that we understand its role in helping our children and young people. In particular, as we review the past year, we have to acknowledge the fact that there has been greater demand in the BCP area, and that we have seen instances where young people have overspilt into the Dorset Council area and has been reported in the media as being in our area, although the children are not necessarily our direct responsibility. That said, I would also want to focus on the excellent work of the harbour down in Weymouth, and that has been recognised. And I hope we will be gathering data from that project to substantiate its rollout in other areas. In respect of other areas of the Youth Justice Service, of course, we do acknowledge it works on a relatively tight team and has done for a number of years now. But they do deliver for us, and we are happy that. Unfortunately, David Webb, who is normally the author of our reports and leads that, isn't with us today. But from an operational point of view, I'm sure Teresa would like to speak on this matter, and possibly other senior officers who are present.
Thank you. And I am really pleased to bring this report forward. Again, it's another really positive position at the back end of a pandemic, which could have been very different. And I think the highlights within the report, which I'd like to draw your attention to, is the really, really good progress around first-time entrants, those FTEs. Apologies for this is a particular acronym report, apologies for that. What we know is that the moment a child becomes part of the juvenile justice system, their likelihood of staying in that system increases, beyond any other potential. So avoiding first-time entrants is actually the game plan here. And you can see year on year from that position in that report describing that, page 187, for the last 4 years, year on year, Dorset outstripping all other places to get those first-time entrants down. However, where we've looked at, and I chair the board for both BCP and Dorset Council, where we've looked at the area of concern within the report, which is that the number of under 13s, and many of you will be aware that other countries don't have a criminal age of 10, but we do, and those children between 10 and 13 have been receiving real conspicuous care from us, because we're really concerned about having any children in that age group who are actually having a period of time in our custody suites or engaging clearly in activities that bring them to the attention of the police. So it's a really strong board. There's a real sense of joint understanding of where we need to pay particular attention as a partnership. And an area that we absolutely take that kind of pan-Dorset approach in is where we've been really working very effectively, and it is partly in no small way as a result of the harbour work. We haven't had custodials for young people during the past 2 years. It's been a really important activity for us. We were so concerned about having any of our young people in custody during this period of time, knowing that they were only going to have 5-10 minutes a day out of their cell. So where it was safe for our communities to do so, we've been wrapping around and making sure that we keep those young people out of custody. Our colleagues in BCP haven't been able to achieve that in quite the same way in recent years, and they do have a number of children in custody. And when we looked at those children, what we saw was an overrepresentation of black boys. And so it was really important for us to understand what was happening there. And the best way, as we'll all appreciate, to understand that is to go and talk to the children themselves. And so a number of members of the team went and spent time with each one of those young people who were in custody and listened very closely to what they were telling us would have made a difference for them. And lots of that feedback from those young people we're taking forward into our work now to make sure that we don't see that overrepresentation and we think about what it is that we can do differently with colleagues in BCP to make sure that doesn't happen into the future. And importantly, the early learning for the 10 to 13-year-olds was actually all of those children all of those children had been in a family where domestic violence was a feature. So it isn't that actually they come to our attention because of their criminality first, they come to our attention first because of the environment they're living in. And at one level, we all know that, but it's a really important reminder that it's so important that we work on that space, because the consequence is children will simply find themselves in trouble with the police. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Non-executive members, I've got Les Fry.
Leader, I'd just like to pass on the congratulations to the team and all those working behind this. To keep all those young people out of prison is a massive result for us. It's helping us keep Dorset safer. It's keeping them out of the criminal world, reducing crime, reducing the number of victims that we have across Dorset. So I think it's a massive achievement, and we should pass on our thanks to all those behind the scenes, and particularly those on the Harbour project who've done extremely well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Les. Paul Kimber.
For the report. Some years ago, I was a volunteer with the Youth Justice, and I actually saw the work from the inside, and that will stay with me forever. And I also give my thanks. Just one question: Do we have many volunteers these days within the Youth Justice, people that give up their time to help our young ones? Thank you.
I think it's something that fell away during the pandemic. It was very difficult for our staff to work safely with families, and what we saw really was the opportunity to bring any other people into the frame wasn't going to be possible. But I think it's something we very much want to look at both in the Harbour and in the Youth Justice Service going forward, because, as you say, they bring so many other options around those opportunities for those young people. So, yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Kimber, and it's something we're looking to turn back on now. Now it's safer to do so.
Thank you for that, Teresa. I don't see anybody else. Cabinet. Ray.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd just like to highlight something that very often goes unnoticed, and that's the amount of people that work behind the scenes to make these sort of things a success. We tend on far too many occasions to take things for granted. And again, highlighted in this report is the amount of work that has gone on behind the scenes to bring forward a successful conclusion. I, like many, don't like to see younger people getting into trouble, because I feel at that stage we failed them as much as they failed society. So I'm only too happy to obviously congratulate the team, but also support this going forward. And again, can somebody pass on my congratulations and thanks to the team that's behind the scenes? Because we keep ignoring, we've got a lot of very successful things going on in this council at the moment, but that is driven by officers. It's all very well us saying and reading the reports, but the officers do the work behind the scenes. And we tend to forget the amount of work that goes into a lot of this stuff. So I'm just taking the opportunity to highlight it, because hopefully people will then understand just how much is going on within the council. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for those words, Ray. Andrew.
Thank you. If I may just come back on a few of the things we've heard from members today. Firstly, thank you to Les Fry for his comments. It really does reflect the need for a culture of inclusion, and excluding our children and young people has really detrimental effects felt widely across the community as well as amongst the individuals themselves. So everything we are doing to try and embed inclusion is absolutely justified in what we're seeing. In respect of volunteers, my grateful thanks to anybody who volunteers. As we know, in Dorset, there are something like 50,000 people who volunteer in different capacities, including, of course, in things such as the Youth Justice Service. But if I could put this appeal out, we want that to be as broad a representation as possible as well, and that's something that does keep coming back to us. Finally, I'm sure the Executive Director will ensure that in her weekly feedbacks to officers that there is a reference to Cabinet's acknowledgement of the enormous amount of work that goes on their part to deliver for our children and young people.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Anybody else? Andrew, I assume you're moving the recommendation, which is a recommendation to full council. Have a seconder? Seconded by Ray Bryan. Any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendations of the Senate report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved to go to full council. Go on to agenda item 13, portfolio holder reports. I've seen a few come through. I won't dwell on those this morning, but I will actually neatly go on to 14 because I know certainly in Andrew's case, if there's one or two items mentioned there that are referrals to one of the overview committees, which is something that I've encouraged and I want to continue to encourage because I think that's a great opportunity for other members of this council to get involved in the formation of policy coming through to take this council forward. So I'm not going to I don't think there's any others, but do bear in mind that we've got two overview. Andrew, come in a minute. Two overview committees. They've got opportunities there to make a real difference, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that coming forward. Andrew.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight in my portfolio report the wonderful conversation I had with Mark Blackman last night after the successful first day of Coombe House School being open. More children are joining today. It's phased throughout the week for them to be taking part, but it's so fantastic that a really bold policy of this council has been delivered.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very relevant too. Right, we move on to agenda item 15. Ray.
Thank you, Leader. I've split this into two halves, and I'm going to ask Councillor Knocklacey-Clark to deal with the first part of it, which will be on the work that's been done, sterling work being done by the Low Carbon Dorset team.
Good morning, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet and fellow colleagues. It gives me great pleasure to come here today to give a bit of a spotlight on one of our amazing teams within the Place Directorate, and that's the Low Carbon Dorset team. So Low Carbon Dorset is a 5-year programme of activities to help stimulate growth in Dorset's low-carbon economy and reduce the county's carbon footprint. It was funded by the European Regional Development Fund, and Low Carbon Dorset helps businesses, community and public sector organisations in Dorset and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. The programme is run by Dorset Council's sustainability team and consists of 7 staff, with Heather Keel being the programme manager, and she does an amazing job. It aims to help improve energy efficiency, increase use of renewable energy and aid development of new low-carbon products. Since its launch in April 2018, Low Carbon Dorset has received over 645 applications for support and has awarded over £5.4 million in grants to support 164 renewable energy, energy efficiency and innovation projects across Dorset and BCP. The £5.4 million of grant funding will equate to over £16 million being spent or contracted within the Dorset area on low-carbon initiatives. Between our completed and contracted projects, we are helping 135 different small and medium-sized enterprises, helping to create 6 new carbon-saving products or processes, installing almost 12 megawatt hours of renewable energy production, improving energy efficiency in 65 public houses, reducing the energy usage in public buildings by almost 1.2 million kilowatt hours every year, and saving at least 9,400 tonnes of carbon dioxide every single year. So these numbers include projects already completed and those that we have contracted. And projects that completed last year alone will save an annual 1,390 tonnes of CO2. And added to the completed projects in previous years, cumulatively to date, Low Carbon Dorset funded projects have already saved 6,915 tonnes of CO2. So this programme is due to complete next year. It does still have some funds left to award and is still receiving a number of new applications each and every week. Enough praise really cannot be given to the outstanding team that delivered and are delivering these fantastic benefits to our amazing county. This is just one part of what we're doing as a council to combat the environmental emergency that we all declared. And whilst the programme does come to an end next year, the need for a continuation of these excellent projects of work will continue to be essential for us to meet the 2040 goal we are striving for as a council and the 2050 goal for our entire community. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Nock. A very good insight. Can you make sure that Kate gets your notes so that she can attach them to the minutes? That would be very helpful. Good, really good insight. Ray, you want to say more? I'm going to let John come in, but Ray, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the mic to work.
Parts of this.
Thank you. As recently as last week, Stephen Ford joined us as the new director with responsibility for our climate and ecological path to zero emissions by 2050, as far as the county is concerned. But let me just remind everybody the commitment by this council is to 2040 on areas that we control. We have a report going to scrutiny on the 26th of May. I've received the draft report. I'm pleased to see so many things in there. And again, we will be producing at that meeting the progress report for spring 2022. But there's a couple of items in there I'd just like to, with your permission, Leader, mention, because I think it's very important that we understand just how much work is going on. One of the areas I've received a fair amount of criticism over is the switching of fleet vehicles from fossil fuels. We have a plan on this. It's a controlled plan. It's obviously a very expensive job to transfer from fossil fuel vehicles to either EV or what's to come. And it's the what's to come that concerns me the most. We can invest in EV refuse vehicles, although I'm not sure how we get them back to the base because they have a nasty habit of running out of charge. But as we know, there are alternatives that we can look at. So trials at the moment are being undertaken on the hydrogenated vegetable oil to see whether we can use those instead of diesel. But of course, it'll come as no surprise. My pet on this is hydrogen. So I do think that in the future, we'll be dealing with hydrogen on the heavier end of the vehicles. We've trialled a number of the electric vehicles at the lighter range, and orders are now being sorted out for further action during the 2022-23 period on placing orders on EV vehicles. And again, I'd point out that's not easy because trying to get the availability of them is becoming a bit of a nightmare. There's one other point that I think is worthwhile sort of raising. Nock has already, Councillor Nock Lacey Clark has already talked about the work that the low carbon Dorset team have done. And again, I'd like to add my thanks to them for the work they've done. But I also would like to point out that in working with the Dorset AOMB, we secured 1.3 million funding from Farming in Protected Landscapes programme, and so far in our first year, we've dealt with over 40 projects, delivered £212,000 worth of grants, created a 0.77 hectare acre of woodland creation, 1,482 hectares of land being managed with regenerating farming techniques, and 6 projects to improve the soil quality. All of this work is part of the programme that we're looking at as far as our carbon reductions are concerned and the ecological side of it. I'd also like to point out, for those that aren't aware, that during the last period of this council, 2019 forward, we keep getting questions raised on our pensions. We've seen a dramatic reduction in the amount of money that we have invested in the pension fund on fossil fuels. I'll give further details of that at the scrutiny meeting, but there are tremendous reductions already happening, and I think it's just over 1% of the pension fund is currently involved with fossil fuels. And that's a dramatic reduction since 2019 when this council came together. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you very much, Knock. John Andrews.
Mike's still on. Is it? Oh, that's better. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Knock Lacey Clark and all of the team that work for Low Carbon Dorset for a fantastic effort. I think you've already intimated that report will be coming to us, because I'd like to make sure that that gets to the town and parish councils to show the excellent work that's going on in Dorset Council. I would also pick on what Councillor Ray Brown's comments about EVs and have you thought about also contacting town and parish councils and maybe increasing the buying power with more vehicles, because I'm sure there will be some that are suitable for town and parish councils to use. So it's just a thought. But thank you once again very much. It's, those figures were incredible.
Thank you very much, John. Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Got there in the end. Yeah, Councillor Andrews has stolen some of my thunder on some of the things that he's already mentioned. Likewise, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Lacey Clark for his report. It's a really good news story, which was great to hear. And similarly to Councillor Andrews, I was wondering, Councillor Bryan's team, whether there is any thought to having greater engagement with town and parish councils across the county. I think a lot of this work that can be done within the parish and town councils, and I know there's some work going on in my town council at the moment on some of the assets that are within my town council, that where those town and parish councils either own assets or those assets are intrinsically important to those towns and parishes, then there could be some cooperation in terms of joint funding on some of these projects. I think, you know, we were at a period where Dorset Council cannot afford to pay for everything. We know that. We know that we've got budget restrictions ourselves, and there are those towns and parishes that could step up the mark and help with some of that funding. So I would just like to ask, is there an opportunity for the team, or are they planning to actually go out and reach out to town and parish councils? I know DAPTC would welcome that, to actually go into those town and parish council chambers and to engage directly with those parish and town councils. Thank you.
Get ready to respond to that.
Yeah, only too happy to. As I've mentioned earlier on, we've just taken on a new director to cover some of the responsibilities that this is. And one of the things that he's very keen on is getting closer to both the parish and town councils, but all the general public. I said at the last full council meeting that it's the general public we need to convince. And I do sincerely hope that my colleagues will help in making sure that we get the general public on side, because all they look at the moment is their cost of living, and rightfully so as individuals, but this isn't going to go away. We've got a lot of work to do. So yes, in answer to both Councillor Andrews and Councillor Bartlett, part of the plan is for us to take a direct link to the town and parish councils, rather than through so many of the independent groups that seem to want to take this over. So we will take control of it, and yes, there will be a planned programme to talk to town and parish councils, but also to start to get the general public on side. And can I just say that we, in this budget, considering it was such a tight year for raising a budget, we still managed to find some money for a new corporate director, some capital money, 10 million over the next few years, and $750,000 of revenue, and this shouldn't be ignored. This is a massive step forward in what is a really trying year financially. It shows the commitment of this council to achieving what we set out. So I'm happy to yet again bang the drum.
Thank you, Ray. I've got Paul Kimber and Brian.
Leader, I welcome the part of the statement regarding pensions, and I wonder if this might be an opportunity that we might be able to send out a press release on that. That's something that certainly constituents have written to me about and given concern. I want to drill down a bit further. You've given some eye-watering amounts that have been given in grants, and I want to ask how we're reaching, if I dare say, the poorest people in our communities, the people that really need this benefit of insulation, especially in and around the house, and so that we can, the people that, if you like, find it toughest to make ends meet. I wonder if you'd be happy enough to give a further briefing on that. Thank you.
Is that something you want to take away?
Now, what I don't want to do is preempt the scrutiny report, because there is details in there of the money we've already allocated to housing through various grants. Graham Carr-Jones, who's sitting along from me, has done a lot of work on this in conjunction with our team, and we've got some good success stories, but can we save that until the scrutiny, please? Because obviously scrutiny might have something to say on it.
I agree with that point. It's something that Paul raises a good point, but it's something to do through the scrutiny process. I've got Brian Heatley, and then I'll come to the Cabinet.
Thank you, Leader. Very short point, but great to hear that the corporate director is here and of all that good work by Low Carbon Dorset. Councillor Lacey-Clark listed a lot of figures, but they were absolute figures. In getting better management information in this area, and I had a little plea for that at the last Cabinet, we need to know how that compares with the totals. So 1,390 tonnes of CO2, great, but what proportion of the overall Dorset total is it? Otherwise, and that applies to lots of these figures, and I hope the report that goes to the Scrutiny Committee will give us these relative figures. Thank you.
Brian, I recall you making this point before about it's great, but how does it compare with this and how does it compare with others maybe as well? Ray, do you want to come back on that? Because I don't know whether this is going to be picked up by scrutiny or there's a piece of work to be done beyond that.
It's certainly something that I expect to get raised by scrutiny. We're not in a position at the moment to give those numbers. They are being worked on. Whether they'll be ready for scrutiny or not, I'm not sure, because it is a massive task to work out where we were and the steps we've taken so far to where we are now. All I can assure you is that those figures will be made available, and I would estimate if they're not ready for scrutiny, will be soon after.
That, Ray. Graham.
Thank you, Leader. It's just a point, really. We sit in the chamber and we look at the good news. We talk about the good messaging. But what I want to do after this meeting is pick up with the portfolio holder and the lead member of ways that we can actually show the public what it is that we're doing, whether it be by a poster campaign or whether I think that we lose a trick because we all know of the great work that we're doing. And I think that as a council, in many respects, we don't blow our trumpets hard enough, and we need to actually tell the people out there how good we are and how well we're doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Graham. Any other members of the Cabinet? Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just make you aware that I have a small pecuniary interest with a automotive group that operates in South and West Dorset, so I will reserve my comments to about the east and north of the county for the point of clarification, but just reflect on the journey that we've been on, and I do mean the journey we've been on since I became a councillor in 2016, when I recall that I think the only EV charging point at the time was actually in Councillor Bartlett's Wimborne ward, behind the centre there. Since then, of course, we've seen a rollout of the infrastructure in other areas, and a lot of that has come from business funding as well, which is important to acknowledge. So I think what I'd like to say to Ray in my support of this is understanding the infrastructure that's going to be required and what perhaps, for example, a hydrogen fueling station might look like, and how advanced we could be in putting that into things like our local plan going forward.
Thank you very much. Do you want to come back? And then Jonathan's over there.
Yes, and I take on board what's been said by my colleagues. And again, it's all part of the future plan. I don't hide my passion for hydrogen. I never have done. We were the first area to actually give money to the production of a hydrogen facility, which we did through Low Carbon Dorset. That is a massive step forward. There's hydrogen there once we can get hydrogen trucks, which obviously will help us tremendously. It'll be a bit more expensive to buy the vehicles, but the running costs obviously will then be much reduced and will be clean. And that's the important issue as far as this is concerned. Picking on what Councillor Carr-Jones has said, only too willing to sit down and discuss anything, because I have to congratulate him and his team, because over 50 Dorset households have already received Green Home grants, and there's much more we can do, but it all takes money, but we're getting there. And again, tremendous steps. And I thank my colleagues for all their support.
Thank you very much. Ray. Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to confirm with Councillor Parry, please, my understanding for the purposes of the minutes of the meeting, that you weren't actually disclosing a disclosable pecuniary interest. And of course, there's not a matter for decision here at this meeting. Just keeping you safe.
I'm very grateful to Jonathan for that point, but I think it just for my own openness to council and cabinet, I just wanted to make them aware of it.
Interestingly enough, Jonathan, you got to almost the same point as I've written update here, because we shouldn't lose sight of the fact this is an update of our progress and work going on, rather than any decision making or anything else. Right, colleagues, that's the end of that item. There are no urgent items and no exempt business. So at just after 11 o'clock, I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.